Arizona Territory, 1877. The unforgiving summer sun beat down on the parched earth, turning the valley into a furnace that tested even the hardiest frontier folk. Violet Lawson wiped the perspiration from her brow as she stood on the porch of her modest homestead, watching dust devils dance across the distant plains. At 22 years old, she had already known more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Her golden blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though rebellious tendrils escaped to frame her face, bleached nearly white by the relentless sun. She wore a simple cotton dress, faded blue from countless washings, the hem dusty from her morning chores. The dress had once belonged to her mother, like the homestead itself, both inheritance from a life cut short by frontier fever 3 winters past. Violet had learned early that attachment was the enemy of survival. Love only made the inevitable losses harder to bear. Her father had withered away after her mother's passing, leaving Violet alone to tend their small ranch with nothing but determination and the skills they'd taught her. The frontier was no place for tenderness. It demanded vigilance, self-reliance, and an unwavering resolve. Vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she wanted was simple: to preserve her independence and hold onto the land her parents had sacrificed everything to claim. What she needed, though she'd never admit it, was someone to share the burden, someone to break through the walls she'd built around her heart. Shading her eyes against the glare, Violet spotted movement on the horizon, a rider approaching, slumped precariously in the saddle. Her first instinct was wariness. Strangers meant trouble more often than not in these parts, but as the horse drew nearer, she saw the rider was barely conscious, clinging to his mount with the last of his strength. "Lord Almighty," she muttered, hurrying down the porch steps. The horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, stopped before her as if sensing help had arrived. The man atop it groaned, his face pale beneath the dust and blood. He couldn't have been much older than 25, with sandy brown hair and features that might have been handsome if not contorted in pain. His shirt was soaked with blood around his left shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Violet called, reaching for the reins. The man's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Indians?" he managed to ask, voice barely audible. "No Indians around here for months," she assured him. "You're safe now." As if her words granted permission, he slipped from consciousness, sliding sideways off his horse. Violet lunged forward, unable to catch his full weight but managing to break his fall enough that he didn't crack his skull on the hard-packed earth. She looked down at the wounded stranger, this unexpected complication in her carefully ordered existence. Common sense told her to send him on his way once he was stable. Attachment only led to heartache. But something in his face, vulnerability etched across features too young for such pain, made her hesitate. "Well," she said to the horse, who regarded her with liquid brown eyes, "I reckon Christian charity demands I at least stop the bleeding." Little did Violet know that the wounded cowboy bleeding on her doorstep was Levi Whitaker, heir to the Whitaker Cattle Company, and through a series of legal transactions she knew nothing about, the rightful owner of every acre she called home. Violet worked through the night, cleaning and binding the bullet wound that had torn through Levi's shoulder. The fever came on strong by midnight, his body burning with infection as he thrashed and mumbled, caught in delirious dreams. She changed cold compresses, spooned broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and prayed to a god she wasn't sure still listened. Dawn broke on the second day with his fever unbroken. Violet slumped in the chair beside her bed where she'd placed him, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "Elizabeth," he murmured, reaching out with his good arm, "don't go." "Hush now," Violet said, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "I'm not Elizabeth, and I'm not going anywhere." His eyes opened, feverish but momentarily clear. "Who are you then, angel?" Despite herself, Violet felt a smile tug at her lips. "No angel, just Violet Lawson. You're on my homestead, about 20 miles east of Copper Springs." Recognition flickered briefly in his eyes before they drifted closed again. "Lawson," he whispered so quietly she almost missed it, then fever claimed him once more. For 3 days, Violet fought death for the stranger, neglecting her chores and catching sleep in brief snatches. On the morning of the 4th day, she awoke slumped in her chair to find clear blue eyes studying her face. "You saved my life," he said simply. Violet straightened, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "You're not out of danger yet." "That wound needs proper tending. I've seen men die from less," he said. "I'm Levi Whitaker." She nodded, rising to fetch fresh water. You mentioned that in your fever, also called me Elizabeth a few times. A shadow crossed his face. My sister. She died 2 winters back. Violet paused, recognizing the familiar ache of loss in his voice. Against her better judgment, she felt the first crack in her carefully constructed walls. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. Rest now. We can talk when you're stronger. Over the next 2 weeks, as spring yielded to early summer, Levi regained his strength. Violet found him to be a surprisingly pleasant houseguest, attempting to help despite his injury and listening with genuine interest to her tales of frontier life. Your father chose good land, Levi remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains copper and gold. He'd managed to shave that morning, revealing a strong jawline and features that were indeed handsome when not contorted in pain. This valley has the best grazing for 50 miles. Violet nodded, pride warming her voice. Pa had an eye for promising country, said this land would provide for generations of Lawsons if we treated it right. Something flickered in Levi's expression, but he simply nodded. He sounds like a wise man. He was, she agreed, studying him. What about your people? You mentioned your sister, but not your parents. Levi looked away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. My father built a cattle empire from nothing. Started with 3 cows and a broken-down bull, ended up with one of the largest spreads in the territory. Ended up, Violet pressed gently. He died 6 months ago. Heart gave out during a cattle drive. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she recognized the carefully controlled grief beneath the words. I've been trying to hold things together since. Is that what brought you to these parts? His hesitation was brief but noticeable. Business matters. I was heading back to our main ranch when I crossed paths with some rustlers. They took exception to my objections about the brand on their cattle. Violet smiled despite herself. So you got shot picking a fight with cattle thieves. I prefer to think of it as standing up for what's right, Levi returned with a grin that transformed his face, creating creases beside his eyes that suggested he'd once smiled often. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Violet found herself watching him more carefully, noting the way his eyes sometimes clouded with unspoken thoughts. There was more to Levi Whitaker's story than he was telling, and despite her better judgment, she found herself increasingly curious about the man behind the easy charm. You need to strengthen that shoulder, Violet declared one morning, placing a bucket of feed in Levi's hands. The chickens need feeding, and the motion will help. Levi raised an eyebrow but accepted the bucket. Yes, ma'am, any other orders while you're giving them? The east fence needs mending, but that can wait until next week. She hesitated, then added, unless you're planning to ride out before then. The question hung between them, neither acknowledging that his wound had healed enough for travel days ago. I reckon I owe you at least a few fence posts, Levi said finally. Relief flooded Violet, followed immediately by self-reproach. Getting attached to a drifting cowboy was foolish. He'd move on eventually like everyone else in her life, yet as days stretched into weeks, Levi showed no signs of leaving. He fixed the east fence, then the north one. He helped with the small herd of cattle Violet maintained, showing a skilled hand that spoke of years in the saddle. In the evenings they sat on the porch, sharing stories as the stars emerged above. Where did you learn to doctor folks like you did me? Levi asked one night, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. Violet's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending, one of Levi's, torn during fence work. My mother was a healer of sorts. Folks came from all over when they couldn't afford a proper doctor. She taught you well. She died teaching me, Violet said quietly. Frontier fever took her after she spent weeks tending the McDermott family. I couldn't save her, despite everything she'd shown me. Levi's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. That's a heavy burden to carry. Life is burdens, she replied, but didn't withdraw her hand. You gather them as you go, and if you're lucky, you find the strength to keep walking. And if you're very lucky, he said, his eyes reflecting the first emerging stars, you find someone to share the load. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then Violet pulled her hand away, rising abruptly. It's getting late, she said briskly. I need to be up at dawn. That night Violet lay awake long after retiring, troubled by the warmth Levi's touch had kindled. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. The frontier had taught her that lesson repeatedly. Yet when she finally drifted to sleep, her dreams were filled with blue eyes and the sensation of a hand covering hers beneath a star-filled sky. The letter arrived on a sweltering July afternoon, delivered by a travel-worn cowhand who tipped his hat to Violet before handing the envelope to Levi. "Mr. Whitaker, Jenkins sent me. Says things at headquarters are getting complicated. Those papers need signing, and the bank's making noise about the loan." Violet froze in the doorway, a pitcher of lemonade forgotten in her hands. "Mr. Whitaker, headquarters, loan." Levi's expression tightened as he took the envelope. "Thank you, Tom. Tell Jenkins I'll be there by week's end." After the writer departed, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle. "You're leaving," Violet said finally, setting down the pitcher with careful precision. "Violet, there are things I need to explain." "No need," she cut him off, her voice deliberately light. "You've healed, you have business elsewhere. That was always the arrangement." Levi stepped closer, his expression earnest. "It wasn't an arrangement. These weeks with you have been a pleasant interlude," she finished for him, "but we both have responsibilities." Before he could respond, she turned and walked toward the barn, her back straight and shoulders squared. She wouldn't let him see how his imminent departure affected her. She'd known all along this day would come, hadn't she? The next morning, Violet woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Following the aroma to the kitchen, she found Levi at the stove, his back to her. "I thought we should talk," he said without turning, "after breakfast." "There's nothing to discuss," Violet replied, pouring herself coffee. "You've been a good friend during your recovery, but we both knew it was temporary." Levi turned to face her, his expression serious. "Did we? Because I've been thinking maybe it doesn't have to be." Hope flared in Violet's chest before she ruthlessly extinguished it. "You have responsibilities elsewhere, important ones, judging by your friend's urgency." "Yes, I do," he admitted. "My father's business has problems that need addressing, but that doesn't mean—" A sharp knock at the door interrupted him. Violet answered it to find Sheriff Patterson, his weathered face grave beneath his gray mustache. "Morning, Miss Lawson. Sorry to disturb you, but there's been a development regarding your property that requires attention." Violet frowned. "My property? What development?" The sheriff's eyes shifted to Levi, who had appeared in the doorway behind her. "Mr. Whitaker. Didn't expect to find you here." "Sheriff," Levi acknowledged with a nod. "You two know each other." Violet looked between them, confusion giving way to unease. "Mr. Whitaker's father was a prominent man in these parts," the sheriff explained. "Which brings me to my visit. It seems there's been a misunderstanding about the ownership of this land." The ground seemed to shift beneath Violet's feet. "What misunderstanding? This homestead has been in my family for 15 years. Sheriff Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "According to county records, your father sold this land 3 years ago to Whitaker Cattle Company. The deed was properly filed and witnessed." Violet's gaze snapped to Levi, who had gone very still. "Is this true?" "Not the way it sounds," Levi began. "Your father approached mine when he needed money for your mother's medical care. My father advanced the funds with the land as collateral." "When your father couldn't repay." "So you've known all along," Violet interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "While I nursed you back to health, while I shared my home and my stories, you knew you owned this land." "I was going to tell you," Levi insisted. "But then I got to know you, and I saw what this place meant to you, and I wanted to find another solution." "Like what?" Violet demanded, anger rising to mask the deeper hurt beneath. "Charity from the wealthy cattle baron to the naive homesteader. Or perhaps you thought to make me so grateful for your attention that I wouldn't mind being displaced." "That's not fair," Levi protested. "I never thought of you that way." "How did you think of me, Mr. Whitaker? As a problem to be solved, a complication in your business affairs?" The sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'll leave you folks to sort this out. But Miss Lawson, legally speaking, this property belongs to Whitaker Cattle Company now." After the sheriff departed, the silence in the small cabin was deafening. "Violet, please let me explain," Levi finally said. "I didn't know about the land when I was injured. I only realized who you were during my fever when you told me your name. And you said nothing for weeks, she replied, her voice flat, while I tended your wounds and shared my table. Because I was trying to find a solution that wouldn't hurt you. Levi ran a hand through his hair in frustration. My father made the deal, not me. I've been trying to figure out how to make it right. There's nothing to make right, Violet said, squaring her shoulders. If the land legally belongs to you, I'll pack my things and be gone by sundown. That's not what I want, Levi insisted, stepping toward her. Violet backed away, her eyes cold. What you want stopped mattering to me the moment I learned you've been lying since the day we met. She turned and walked out, her steps carrying her toward the small family plot where her parents lay beneath simple wooden crosses. There, away from Levi's pleading eyes, she finally allowed the tears to fall. Everything she'd feared about letting someone close had proven true. Trust was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. Connection only sharpened the inevitable pain of loss, and Levi Whitaker had just become the living proof of her deepest fears. Levi found her at sunset, sitting beside her parents' graves. He approached cautiously, stopping several paces away. "I've sent word to the main ranch," he said quietly. "I've instructed my foreman to prepare the papers returning this land to you, free and clear." Violet didn't look up. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's making things right." Levi moved closer, kneeling in the dust beside her. "My father didn't tell me about this land. I've been reviewing his business dealings since his death, trying to understand the empire he built. I only connected your name to this property during my fever." "And said nothing for weeks after," she reminded him, finally meeting his gaze. "At first I was too weak to think clearly," he admitted. "Then, as I recovered, I saw how much this place meant to you, how hard you worked. I couldn't just take it from you. So you decided to court the poor homesteader instead. Make her fall for you so the business transaction would go down easier." Levi flinched as if she'd struck him. "Is that what you think happened between us? A business strategy?" The raw hurt in his voice gave Violet pause. "I don't know what to think anymore. You kept this from me." "I kept it from you because I was afraid," Levi admitted, his voice low. "Afraid that once you knew who I was, you'd see only the Whitaker name and fortune, not the man who sat beside you on the porch each night. Afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking now, that any feelings between us were calculated rather than real." "And what feelings would those be?" Violet challenged, though her heart hammered in her chest. Levi met her gaze steadily. "I love you, Violet Lawson, not your land, not your homestead. Your strength, your determination, your gentle hands that saved my life. I love the way you hum when you think no one's listening, and how you talk to your chickens like they understand every word." Violet looked away, unwilling to let him see how his words affected her. "Pretty speeches don't change the facts." "No, they don't," Levi agreed. "The facts are that I own this land on paper, and by this time tomorrow you will own it in truth. What happens after that is up to you." He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "I'll leave at first light. You'll have your home free and clear, and never have to see me again if that's what you want." As he walked away, Violet remained beside her parents' graves, torn between anger and a deeper emotion she wasn't ready to name. Dawn found Violet still awake, having passed the night in restless contemplation. She'd spent hours examining the ledgers her father had kept, finding entries that confirmed Levi's story. Her father had indeed borrowed a substantial sum 3 years ago, when her mother's illness had required expensive treatments from doctors in distant towns. The magnitude of her father's sacrifice, mortgaging their future to try to save her mother, left Violet breathless with grief renewed. Yet alongside this pain came understanding of the impossible choice he'd faced and the burden of secrets he'd carried to his grave. Could she blame Levi for his own difficult position, for trying to find a solution that caused the least harm? She heard movement from the barn where Levi had insisted on sleeping after their confrontation. Making a sudden decision, she left the cabin, crossing the yard just as Levi emerged, leading his saddled horse. He stopped when he saw her, his expression carefully neutral. "I've left the papers on the table, everything's signed. Jenkins will file them with the county clerk." Violet nodded, studying his face in the soft light of dawn. He looked tired, shadows beneath eyes that had lost their customary warmth. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why what?" "Why give back the land? It's worth a small fortune, especially to your cattle operation." Levi's grip on the reins tightened, because some things matter more than money or business, because I couldn't build my future on the ruins of yours. And is that all? Violet pressed, taking a step closer. I meant what I said yesterday, Levi replied, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Violet. I have since before I even knew I owned this land, but I understand why you can't trust that now. Violet took another step toward him. My father always said a person's actions speak louder than their words. Your actions say a great deal, Levi Whitaker. Hope flickered in his eyes. What do they say? That perhaps I was too quick to judge. That maybe, just maybe, there are some people worth trusting, even out here. Levi released his horse's reins, closing the distance between them. I never meant to hurt you, Violet. Everything between us has been real from the start. I believe you, she said softly, but I need time. This is complicated. Time I can give, Levi replied. I have business at the main ranch that needs attention. I could return in, say, 2 weeks. We could talk then if you're willing. Violet nodded, surprising herself with the hope that bloomed in her chest. 2 weeks. As Levi mounted his horse, he looked down at her with an expression that made her heart stutter. For what it's worth, these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Despite being shot and fevered, Violet asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Worth every moment of pain, he assured her with the grin that transformed his face. As she watched him ride away, Violet acknowledged the truth she'd been fighting for weeks. Despite her determination to remain detached, despite the walls she'd built, she had fallen in love with Levi Whitaker. Whether anything could come of those feelings remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The 2 weeks of Levi's absence gave Violet time to think. She worked the land as always, tending cattle and garden with the same dedication she'd always shown. But her thoughts constantly returned to Levi, his gentle hands, his quiet strength, the way his smile seemed to lighten the heaviest burdens. On the 13th day, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Violet shaded her eyes, watching as it drew nearer, recognizing Levi at the reins alongside another man. As they approached, she saw the wagon was loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. Levi reined in before the cabin, his uncertain smile warming as he saw her. Violet. You're back early, she observed, fighting to keep her voice level despite the joy that surged through her. I couldn't stay away, he admitted, jumping down from the wagon. I've been thinking about what you said, about actions speaking louder than words. He gestured to the wagon. This is Jenkins, my foreman. We've brought supplies to expand the cabin, add proper stables, whatever improvements you want to make. Violet raised an eyebrow. I don't recall asking for improvements. You didn't, Levi acknowledged. Consider it an apology or an investment in the future, your future, regardless of other considerations. The older man beside him cleared his throat. I'll just start unloading these supplies, Mr. Whitaker. As Jenkins busied himself with the wagon, Levi stepped closer to Violet. I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks, about what I want, what matters most. And what conclusions did you reach? Violet asked, her heart hammering. That I don't want my father's cattle empire if it means living without you, Levi said simply. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to his expectations, to be worthy of the Whitaker name. But these weeks away from you made me realize that none of it means anything if I'm alone. Violet's breath caught. What are you saying, Levi? I'm saying I love you, Violet Lawson. I'm saying that if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, right here on this land that means so much to you. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Not as owner and tenant, but as partners, equals. And your business, your responsibilities. They'll still be there, Levi acknowledged, but we can manage them together if you're willing. This valley could be the heart of something remarkable, not just cattle, but the home your father envisioned for generations of Lawsons. Hope bloomed in Violet's chest, but caution tempered it. And if I say no? If I'm not ready? Then I'll ride away and respect your decision, Levi said quietly. The land is yours either way. My feelings for you aren't conditional on your answer. Violet studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that matched her own. All her life she'd believed that the frontier demanded isolation, that connection only led to pain. But standing before her was a man offering partnership instead of loneliness, strength instead of vulnerability, a future instead of mere survival. "I've been thinking too," she said finally, "about walls and burdens and whether they're meant to be carried alone." Levi's expression was carefully neutral, but hope flickered in his eyes. "And what did you decide?" "That perhaps my parents didn't work this land so I could live in isolation. That maybe the true legacy they left wasn't the homestead itself, but the love that built it." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, "And that I love you, Levi Whitaker, despite my best efforts not to." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. "I was so afraid you'd send me away," he murmured against her hair. Violet laughed, the sound freer than she could remember it being in years. "I considered it, but then I realized something important." "What's that?" Levi asked, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "That sometimes the things that seem like obstacles, a wounded stranger, a land dispute, even our own fears, are actually the path to something better than we imagined possible." Levi's expression grew serious. "I promise you, Violet, I will spend every day making sure you never regret this decision." "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Whitaker," she replied, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. Autumn 1878. Golden light bathed the expanded homestead as the setting sun painted the valley in amber and rose. On the enlarged porch of what was now a proper ranch house, Violet stood in a simple white dress, wildflowers woven through her golden hair, which hung loose down her back. Beside her, Levi waited in his best suit, his expression a mixture of awe and joy, as the traveling preacher spoke the words that would unite them as husband and wife. The small gathering of witnesses, Jenkins and other hands from the Whitaker ranch, neighbors from surrounding homesteads, even Sheriff Patterson, smiled as the couple exchanged vows beneath an arch of autumn branches. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Levi drew her into his embrace, Violet felt the last of her walls crumble. The frontier hadn't defeated her parents' dream after all. Instead, through an unexpected twist of fate, a wounded cowboy who turned out to own her land, their legacy would continue, stronger than before. Later, as lanterns glowed and fiddle music filled the yard, Levi led Violet in a dance beneath the stars. "Happy?" he asked, his voice soft against her ear. Violet looked around at the thriving ranch that now combined Whitaker resources with Lawson determination, at the community gathered to celebrate their union, and finally at the man who had taught her that vulnerability could be strength. "More than I ever believed possible," she answered truthfully. "It turns out the frontier isn't just about survival after all." "What is it about then?" Levi asked, spinning her gently. Violet smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Partnership, finding someone to share the burdens. Building something that lasts beyond ourselves." "Love," Levi said simply. "Yes," Violet agreed, resting her head against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. "Even here, perhaps especially here, love." As they danced beneath the endless Arizona sky, Violet thought of her parents, imagining their approval of the man who had helped her transform their modest homestead into a thriving ranch. The land they had sacrificed for would indeed support generations of their descendants, not just Lawson's, but Whitaker's too. The frontier had taught Violet that attachment led to loss, but Levi had shown her a deeper truth, that without connection, survival itself was empty. Together they had forged something stronger than either could have built alone, a love capable of taming even the wild frontier.